We having fun? Yeah.
Hi. Are the footsteps you followed as a child the same as those you'll follow as an adult? Or does every new day present an opportunity to choose a different path, to define your own journey? Are you more a product of your genes or your upbringing? How much does society and culture affect our development? The study of human development seeks to answer questions like these in an ongoing scientific investigation.
And how often do you see and play with or hang out with Joel?
The scientific study of human development explores how and why people change or remain the same as they grow older.
We study development because we're curious. In addition, we want to understand how children develop, how adults develop, and how things change across the lifespan in order to get a better understanding of what we can expect as we develop, and also to provide guidance for pediatricians, for obstetricians, for gerontologists, for others that are working with people at different stages of the lifespan to help them intervene, to prevent problems, to detect problems, so we have a better roadmap of how we're going to develop across the life course.
The study of development evolved from a philosophical dispute between the effects of biology versus the environment. In other words, the importance of nature and nurture. John Locke, a British philosopher, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, a French philosopher, originally framed this debate.
They really had very different views of development, and they really set the stage for the notion of nature and nurture. John Locke said that children were born as a tabula rasa, which means a blank slate, in which nurture makes its imprint. Rousseau, on the other hand, suggested that children were born with an innate goodness, and so it's really a biological argument. And so we've really had set by these two contrasting philosophical positions what now emerges as the current nature-nurture debate. Is biology more important? Is the environment more important? And of course, they're both important.
Be honest and always stand for justice.
Be honest and always stand for justice.
Respect and help each other.
Respect and help each other.
Be loyal and courteous.
Loyal and courteous.
Bravo!
Human beings grow up and mature in ways influenced by factors within themselves and by factors outside themselves. The external forces can be found in the different environments or contexts in which development takes place.
Context really means the set of influences in which you're embedded. And a context could be, for example, the family context, or another context is the peer context, or the school context, or the workplace context. So all of these are kind of, if you like, settings. And each of these settings have characteristics, different agents, different demands, different tasks that confront the child and the adult. And it's how they manage those particular tasks in those settings is going to shape the way they develop.
In the 1970s, researcher Yuri Bronfenbrenner developed a useful way to look at different settings which influence development. His ecological model presents the developing person surrounded by different contexts and systems.
When you talk about the context of human development, I think we're describing all the ecological systems that an individual exists within. You're talking again about the immediate family and all the adults who may fit familial-like relationships. You're talking about the community that a person lives in. You're describing just the broad range of influences, direct and indirect. Bronfenbrenner's ecological model really presents a wonderful structure to analyze the real-world experiences of any child or adult and their developmental process. That, to me, is one of the more fascinating aspects of human development is that it does give you a set of tools to examine people and events and see how they all kind of come together.
The ecological model describes layers of interacting systems, not only the individual's immediate family environment, but those contexts that are increasingly distant from the person.
For example, the kinds of things that go on in the workplace may affect the parent's mood and affect their child rearing practices. The child's affected, even though they're not directly involved in that setting, there may be some impact of that setting on the child's development. And similarly, the culture, as transmitted through belief systems and values of parents or through television, movies, and other kinds of mass media, they in turn may have an impact on the child. So Bronfenbrenner is really telling us that we have to be aware of the fact that the child is embedded in a variety of systems, and we've got to take into account these various systems in order to understand the way development proceeds.
You're not doing very good. You're tired? Are you tired?
In seeking to understand ourselves and others, it is important to ask questions in a way that produces meaningful answers. A developmental theory helps us accomplish this by providing general principles that enable us to study, explain, and predict real-world events and behaviors.
Kurt Lewin, who was a social psychologist in the 1930s, said there's nothing as practical as a good theory, because otherwise you end up with too much information. And theories basically put blinkers on you and allow you to focus on particular aspects of a problem.
A theory is a set of circumstances. It's a hypothesis that you want to test. It's a belief you have about something. It is something that can be explored in an academic setting.
During the 20th century, psychoanalytic theory, learning theory, and cognitive theory were three major theoretical models that inspired and directed thinking about human development. Psychoanalytic theory contends that human development is the product of irrational, unconscious forces, many of which originate and evolve during childhood. According to Austrian physician Sigmund Freud, who proposed the theory, these unconscious forces influence both thinking and behavior. Although many of Freud's ideas were controversial, his work inspired others, and psychoanalytic theory is still significant as a foundation for developmental science.
His theory was basically a theory of childhood and how we develop through the stages of childhood. The notions that early experience is important, the focus on emotion, the focus on family relationships, all of those things are legacies of Freud. And so Freud has in fact shaped the agenda very much of the last 100 years of what we've done in developmental psychology.
Freud's work inspired others to focus on psychoanalytic theory, most notably Erik Erikson.
Erikson said, development does not stop at the end of childhood. Development is a lifelong process, and Erikson's contribution was building on Freud's earlier stages, but saying that there are other stages later on. There are other challenges represented by early adulthood, middle adulthood, and late adulthood.
Erikson proposed multiple stages of development, from birth to death. According to his theory, each stage is marked by a significant challenge or developmental crisis. For example, adolescents struggle to establish their identity, while midlife adults are more concerned with making contributions that benefit society. How these challenges are resolved depends on the individual and his or her interactions in the social world. While Freud and Erikson emphasized internal qualities that emerge through interactions between the self and society, others argued that it is more important to study overt behavior, that is, what people actually do. Learning theory, sometimes referred to as behaviorism, attempts to explain and predict the way we learn specific behaviors. But just what is learning?
You really need two definitions of learning. The first is a common sense definition, and it is historical. It addresses the issues that man thinks about when they ask what learning is. And that is, it's the acquisition, retrieval, and utilization of knowledge. Historically, that definition hasn't worked well scientifically. It really has not advanced the field. And so psychologists have focused on a behavioral definition. And that definition is that learning is a relatively permanent change in behavior as the result of experience.
Behaviorism explores the connection between stimulus, that is, a certain action or event, and response, the behavior or reaction produced by the stimulus. And over the years, many scientists have studied the ways in which we learn. Ivan Pavlov, a Russian scientist, performed the famous experiment in which he taught dogs to salivate to a number of neutral stimuli, such as a tone and a light. Pavlov began by ringing a bell or turning on a light just before feeding the dogs, and he repeated the action until the dogs salivated at the mere appearance of the stimulus. This kind of learning is called classical conditioning.
What he showed was that we often learn to approach things or avoid things depending on the consequences that are associated with those events. And so it's the pairing of what was previously a neutral event with an aversive event or a pleasant event, could be either way, that would lead to either avoidance or approach depending on what kind of, whether it's a positive or negative event that was paired with the neutral event. And so it's a very powerful way of explaining how children develop bad habits, how they develop fears, how they develop anxieties, and so on.
One of the most famous behaviorists was B.F. Skinner. Skinner proposed that another form of learning called operant conditioning could better explain more complex human behavior.
Skinner, on the other hand, said it's not simply the events that are paired with what we do, but rather it's the consequences of the behavior that we emit. So you make a response, and then something happens. It's that consequence, either positive or negative, which either increases or decreases the chance that that behavior will occur again.
While learning theorists initially tried to explain all behavior through either classical or operant conditioning, contemporary theorists such as Albert Bandura have developed an extension of learning theory called social or observational learning.
Well, observational learning is a process whereby people acquire attitudes, values, new ways of thinking and behaving by observing the actions of others and the consequences for them. Learning through the power example had been trivialized over the years by equating it with simple response mimicry, namely monkey see, monkey do. In my research, I was really studying modeling as a generative, abstract, and a creative process. So people are not simply mimicking. They see peers modeling certain standards. They see moral standards being modeled in educational settings. The mass media models them.
His contribution was really to sort of short-circuit the learning process by saying we can learn a complex series of behaviors through observation, and through observation alone, without the necessity of any kind of reinforcement. So that simply watching somebody do something is often sufficient, that you'll encode that in your memory, and then on a subsequent occasion when that's appropriate, you're often able to reproduce it.
While learning theory focuses on outward behaviors, cognitive theory tends to focus more on a person's internal thought processes. Pioneered by French researcher Jean Piaget, this theory contends that the way individuals experience and understand the world around them shapes their perceptions, attitudes, and actions.
Piaget said instead of learning being a passive process, it's an active process. A child comes in with a natural curiosity, a natural inclination to manipulate objects, to seek out objects and seek out new information. And so you have the child as an active participant in the process.
Piaget envisioned 4 stages of cognitive development. The first stage is called the sensory motor stage, and it spans between birth and 2 years of age. And it's a stage when the child is exercising the reflexes that he's born with. The second stage in his theory is called pre-operations, and it spans between 2 and 7 years of age. And this is the stage when children are very illogical. They make a lot of cognitive mistakes. And the third stage in Piaget's theory is called concrete operations. It spans roughly between 7 and 12 years of age. It's a period when a child starts to solve problems in his head. And finally, the fourth stage is called formal operations, and it usually starts around age 12. Formal operations includes the ability to think abstractly, the ability to form hypotheses and to think about possibilities.
Piaget's notion of the child actively engaged and actively interacting with their world was certainly a different way of looking at children, and it broadened our understanding of what children are doing, what they are capable of doing, and gave us the language to have meaning for the activities of children and influence what opportunities children should be given.
Different theories from various disciplines have made significant contributions to developmental science. But human beings are diverse, and not everyone experiences life in the same way. Most developmental psychologists find it useful to use elements of several theories as a way of gaining a deeper understanding of human development. In addition, new ideas and perspectives are always emerging in hopes of capturing the complexity of the human lifespan. During the past 50 years, the study of human development has evolved by recognizing that people grow and change from birth until the day they die. To more fully explain continuity and change across a person's lifetime, scientists have developed the lifespan perspective, a view of development that describes changes from infancy through late adulthood.
Developmental psychology used to be about children, basically. A lot of focus on infants and school-age development. And the lifespan approach put forward the idea that throughout the life course, development continues. And this was triggered by the development of the population in terms of larger numbers, higher percentages of older people that first gave rise to more interest in aging.
Lifespan theory essentially looks at development as a lifelong process. And it is not a linear process, it is a process with which there are always steps forward and steps backward. Lifespan theory takes into consideration that, like it or not, we are all lifelong learners. We are all actively engaged in an ever-growing, ever-changing, and expanding world. And just by interacting with a world that's ever-changing, we grow, we develop, we master new things.
What lifespan developmental researchers proposed was that throughout life there is not only gains in early childhood and losses in old age, but that gains and losses co-occur at different phases of the lifespan.
This notion of gains and losses can even be seen in infants. For example, all babies come into the world with the ability to pronounce sounds from any language. However, as they learn the sounds of their native tongue, they lose the ability to make certain sounds unique to other languages.
And also the idea that development happens on several dimensions, in several domains of functioning, and that not necessarily you have gains in all those areas at certain times and losses at other times, but that in some domains of functioning you could have gains of growth, and in other domains of functioning at the same time you would have losses of decline.
One domain in which we see both gains and losses is cognitive functioning. Most people believe that older adults simply lose their cognitive abilities as they age. But research conducted within the lifespan perspective has revealed a more complicated view. Although adults tend to lose some of their processing speed with age, their overall knowledge tends to grow or remain stable well into late adulthood.
Crystallized intelligence, knowledge of facts, knowledge of vocabulary, goes up and stays pretty much the same, pretty high up into old age, whereas fluid intelligence, that is the intelligence that deals with the operations, the problem solving, the fast and quick procedures, and especially the speed aspect of those, declines a lot earlier and then goes downward. So they follow different directions. There are different dimensions of intelligence that follow different directions. Thus, multidimensionality, multidirectionality.
The lifespan perspective views development as both multidimensional, including many dimensions in different domains, and multidirectional, with either gains or losses possible in each domain. Of course, children and adolescents generally tend to advance in their abilities, while adults experience more losses and fewer gains.
It goes on through life. The things that come into your life as you grow and have greater mastery, greater skills, greater power, but then there are things you have to let go of, and there are added responsibilities or whatever that come hand in hand with every new gain. We are growing up the whole time we're alive. We're learning, we're growing, we're stretching our wings, we're trying new things. And that's normal, and that's healthy.
Taking a lifespan perspective, scientists have developed specific theories of development. For instance, one theory seeks to explain how our social relationships change across the lifespan. It started with an observation that older adults seem to have fewer close relationships as they age.
Social relationships are important throughout life. In old age, social relationships rise in importance for individuals. Most people, when you ask them what's most important to them in life, will name a relationship or a person, their families.
For many years, psychologists had concerns about the very reliable finding that older adults tend to have smaller social networks than younger people.
The thinking was that social relationships are good for people, so the more the better. So if older people don't have as many as younger people, isn't that a shame?
The shrinking network was not a bad thing because people were just being more selective, more picky about who they wanted to interact with. And when you looked at the time that they spent interacting with close friends and family members, that amount of time looked very similar to the amount of time that younger people spend in those same types of relationships.
These observations were integrated into a theory called socio-emotional selectivity theory.
Socio-emotional selectivity theory is a theory about motivational changes across the lifespan. And it is a theory premised on the idea that human beings monitor time throughout their lives and always set goals within temporal contexts. When people perceive time as being limited, goals that rise to the top of the goal hierarchy tend to be goals that are emotionally meaningful, emotionally salient. Whereas when people perceive the future as open-ended, then knowledge-related goals rise to the top. So relationships are important always, but at the end of life seem to rise in importance to the very top.
These goals are really shaped by the time that we perceive that we have left in life. And this time perception is critical in how we engage in life.
So as people get older, they perceive time as more limited and are more likely to pursue emotional goals instead of goals that expand their horizons.
As one theory that came from the lifespan perspective, socio-emotional selectivity helps us understand changes in our relationships as we age. However, there are many approaches we can take to understand the changes we experience in life. Whether we are interested in learning more about childhood, adolescence, or the adult years, a variety of different theories and perspectives are available to broaden our understanding of human development.
I think the only real valid study of human development, which really takes into consideration the overlapping contextual nature of life in these days, is one that is more of an eclectic approach, where you try to learn a lot about a lot of different theories, and you learn how to apply them in different circumstances and situations, and you learn about the cross-application of these theoretical models. I think it broadens you to the very rich and infinitely possible outcomes of human development and human personality development.
Just to get started in
But no matter which theory or perspective one uses to study human development, at the core of this unique science is a fascination with ourselves, at what lies behind the image we project to the world, and how that person will change over time.
I believe that everybody cares about human development because there is nothing in this whole wide world as fascinating as our own selves. I think it's important to study human development so that we can provide our children and ourselves with adequate environments to be the best that we can be.
The study of human development helps us understand ourselves and others, and it also provides us with guidelines for what to expect at different points in the lifespan, so we can intervene when problems arise, or find ways to prevent problems from occurring. Psychologists aren't the only ones who benefit from an understanding of human development. Knowledge of how we change from birth to death informs teachers, pediatricians, gerontologists, and others who work to improve people's lives every day.
I really think that life, in all of the complexity and in abundance of information and details, can be overwhelming, and the study of human development helps us wrap our arms around that.